This is On the Games, and today we're going to talk about the best game ever made.
Because there's games that like don't hold your hand at all, and then there's games that like give you a breadcrumb. I'd say this is one of the ones that gives you like a nice breadcrumb.
Yeah. The boss designs are incredibly memorable.
I think the one thing I could say is it's definitely from a different time in terms of how it looks.
Hi, and welcome to Two Souls. I'm one of your hosts, George O'Mara. This is Mark O'Mara. We're going to talk about some games. And today, I'm looking forward to this one. I'm excited. We're going to talk about the best game ever made. Some might want to, argue that fact and all that. And to them, I say, you're wrong. This is the best game ever made. We're going to talk about why. Today, we talk about The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Whew. Such a good game. It's beautiful. Look at that. Look at you see that? He's running across right now. You see that? You see those vibes? You can hear the music. I know you can. I have it here in my heart. I'm going to set the scene for you. It's 1998, Christmas. You got back. It's 1, 2 in the morning. You're holding your toys. And amongst them is a little golden box with a shield, a sword, and the word Zelda. Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time written over. And you're like, I don't know what this is. You wake up the next morning and you plug it into your N64. And then you realize you haven't hooked it up to your TV yet. So you get out the little cables and you start, yellow to yellow, white to white, red to red, all that good stuff. You're excited though. You're like, this is a game. It's fresh. You smell the package,
The plastic.
It was a box, Marco. It's a cardboard box. You're like,
So you're talking about the cartridge.
this is one of the most supple boxes I've ever smelled. You pull out the cartridge. It's got the little wrapping on it. You're like, okay, now I'm starting to get excited. Pull it out. Your mom and dad are still sleeping. Put it in. You don't have to blow on it. It's the first time. You push the button. You click it on. Legend of Zelda. You don't even know what you're in for. Beautiful thing, this game. Okay. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, okay, is the first 3D Zelda game that came out. Up until that point, the Legend of Zelda, the original ones, came out on the NES back in like 88, I believe it was, 89. It was all 2D, They hadn't invented the technology yet. But here we are with 64 bits. And you get enraptured right into it, and you're like, okay, now you're running around Kokorika Village, Kokiri Village. Yeah, man, I can't even say it. I'm so excited. I'm mixing up villages. You're walking around, you're getting your sword, you're learning how to control things in a 3D environment.
You're learning how to Z-target.
Let's not forget the Z-targeting. Can't forget it. And you start off on one of the adventures of a lifetime. So I remember playing this game when it came out, and it was, at the beginning, such an amazing experience because it just felt so alive compared to the games that I had played up until that point. The N64 was still rather fresh. I'd played like the Star Fox 64 and like Super Mario 64 like a ton. But Ocarina of Time, I actually, funnily enough, in those times, I didn't even know it existed at my age. Like I was actually really excited about getting a Game Boy Color. So I had gone to Game Boy Color and I got Link's Awakening. And I was way more excited about that game, funnily enough, than I was about Ocarina of Time. I didn't even know that game existed. I didn't know it would come out. I just wanted a Game Boy with Zelda on it. And one of my uncles bought it for me. He was like, oh, here's one last thing for you. And he gave me Legend of Zelda. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like another Zelda. And then I remember starting to play it. And I got to the Great Deku Tree, and you're like young Link, and you start going through that. And you're like, it's this whole world. Like it was like blowing my mind as a kid, where I'm like, this is so magical, of an experience. And that does play in heavily to the fact that I think this is the best game of all time. But
Nostalgia.
But there's nostalgia. I admit it, off the bat. Nostalgia is a heavy part to play in me saying that. But it's also historically incredibly important when it comes to games.
I'll say, as one who didn't have that nostalgia, that nostalgic kind of experience playing it, growing up, it was just there because you'd already gone through all that.
Yeah.
But it's still I agree. It's a very special game.
Yeah. There's a lot of charm to it. The music was and it still is beautiful. And I remember getting to the point where, like, you know, you get to like Hyrule Field, and you see how big that environment is, and how alive it felt. You know, the day and night cycle and all that. I remember just like my mind being blown, you know. And it's still to this day, like I've that's the one game where, you know, people like will talk about like one or two games or a little group of games that they play like over and over and over again. Like throughout my lifetime, that's the one game I've hands down played the most. Like I know that game like the back of my hand. I can boot it up and do a run, you know, like, you know, I've spent a lot of time with it, you know, and, you know, each time I revisit it, I'm like reminded not only of like the initial memories I had of it, but also like just how well designed it is, because it is really well designed, you know. And there's certain aspects of it that, you know, people aren't really doing anymore. Again, you know, there wasn't a lot of hand holding in the game, you know, and that's what added to the immersion. Like I remember running through areas and like talking to people and trying to figure out
the only
what would work and how could I advance through this area, you know. There's of course Navi, you know, which is a point of contention for some people.
I was gonna say the only handholding I can think of,
but
is like kind of like the owl, because he kind of like, when you get to like big areas, he like tells you where to go and like where things are and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's pointers.
It's like pretty
you know?
it's pretty minimal. It's a like, because there's games that like don't hold your hand at all, and then there's games that like give you a breadcrumb. I'd say this is one of the ones that gives you like a nice breadcrumb.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's like a like Vampire the Masquerade, dude. Like some of the breadcrumbs are like a little bit obtuse.
Yeah.
A little bit, not too much. This one doesn't really do that. It's like very well made.
Yeah, I think that I can say with confidence that even today, if someone were to pick that up and play it, that they'd have a good time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they'd have a good to great time at the minimum. Like if you have never played this game, like you would still enjoy it, because there's still a lot of things that it did first that are still like echoing throughout the game industry, you know. And so when it comes to adventure in like a 3D space, like this is the first game that came out that did it the way that this did.
I think it's one of the.
It's still astounding.
I feel like Zelda in general, or like is like one of the only. I can't think of other franchises that really do it the way they do. Because there's something about it where it's like, you get an item and it has like a use.
Yeah.
And then they like play around with puzzles with that use, and it's like, it's just right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things like that in that game that are like just right.
Yeah.
And I think like the puzzles are one of them. Like the combat's another one.
Combat's still so much fun. Like it's still very enjoyable.
I think a person playing that one today, having never played it, I think they might struggle a little bit with the controls, just because it's like,
yeah,
we're so used to twin stick shooting nowadays, dude. It's like kind of absurd. But like we're so used to just like, okay, you look with this, you move with this, and it's like that I feel like when people go back to games like that, like I think the two control schemes I can think of is like Z targeting, so like Zelda, or like tank controls, like RE4.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people now going back to that would complain and say it's like outdated and it's like obtuse and doesn't make sense and this and that and whatever. But I would argue that.
Yeah.
Because I think they work. I think these control schemes do work, and they do benefit from different kinds of like strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. And
it's just different, I think, is the best way I could put it. Because I feel like there's this connotation with like Z targeting and then tank controls where it's like, oh, it's old, it's archaic.
Yeah.
We've evolved from that, and I'm like, that like tank controls in Resident Evil, like that added to the claustrophobia and the horror. Because you have to like, you can't move while you're shooting, so you account for that. And I feel like it's the same thing with Z targeting, where a person nowadays going back to that would have trouble with it, but like you kind of learn there's just different things you account for with it, and it works very well. And that's what I had to say about that one.
Yeah, I mean, it does work really well, you know, and you know, for those who are listening who haven't held like an N64 controller, that thing, I mean, you want to talk about obtuse, just look at it.
Google an image.
Just look at it, you know, but the Nintendo team like really accounted for all of that. They really figured things out, you know, like it's the whole contextual button thing. That was the first time that popped up in a game, you know, where it's like, okay, one button does multiple things and it's based off of the context.
Yeah, just look at it.
Yeah, like just look on the top. It says what it's going to do, you know, and stuff like that, which some people like might, they might take some time to get used to, but like it's already in your games.
I
Like
think there's a charm to that.
it's already in your games. It's evolved so much from where it first started. This is where it started, and it still works great. Like things like, you can't actually like make Link jump, but like when you run off of like an edge, he jumps in the direction that you're facing. It's like,
There's no jump button.
Camera controls. It's like, oh, how do you control your camera? And it's all like, well, you,
Z-target.
you tap on Z and it centers it behind him.
Or
So
you can like see.
yeah, and so you learn how to walk around and just center the camera behind you. And some people might think like, oh man, but I want to look around and this and that.
You
And
can
I'm
press
like,
up on your C-pad.
and I'm like, well, I mean, push up and you can look around, but like,
Like, why is it inverted?
but it's
I'm
but
like,
it's
you're gonna have
again,
to deal
it's
with that one.
it's one of those things where I'm like, I think to focus on any one of those as like a negative, it's really up to the person. I guess that does go into the realm of subjectivity. I think that like certain limitations and certain like differences in controlling add to the kind of sense of immersion you can have in something. Like the same way that like we talked about like with Bloodborne, where it's like, there's no animation canceling in that.
There's disciplines.
There's
and I feel like Z targeting.
It's the same thing with this.
That's kind of what I'm getting at with like these older mechanics. Is it's like we have this connotation nowadays, like in the whole gaming scene, where it's like we've moved on, but I'm like, it was different disciplines that the player had to follow.
Yeah.
And it led to different feelings in different situations, and it led to a different play style. And so if you're, again, like I use these two games as like the example for this, because like I think they're prime examples of it, but it's like, if you want someone to feel claustrophobic and like a little out of control and like a sense of like thrill and suspense and like combat and stuff, like the tank mechanics add to that.
Yeah. And like with that kind of thing in mind, like when it comes to like evoking like different feelings and all of that, like that's something that this game was the first one in my opinion to like, especially like a 3D like space, like really do like in this regard, I mean, when it comes to like Super Mario 64, that's another game that we'll more than likely talk about at some point, but you had your different worlds you go to and they all felt different. They had different vibes and, different music and all of that, color palettes and all. There's something about Ocarina of Time and the way that, you go from, as young Link, you're going to like, the, Kakariko village or, to go like to like the, what is it? Death Mountain, and you go to like that whole Dodongo's cavern. Like that feeling in there, like feeling so like you can feel like the heat, you can feel like it's like, you can feel the bombs like that you're gonna go find, like it's very like, it's a very isolated kind of feeling, and you do feel like you're on an adventure.
Yeah.
And that carries throughout where like I remember as a kid like going through that and it's like, okay, it's like grass, fire, and then water. Of course there's gonna be that in there, and they do it great. There's subversions to that, and then you become adult Link, which for me, I'm like as a kid, it makes sense as an adult. You're like, it's Ocarina of Time, so like there's probably going to be some sort of time element to this. But as a kid, I was like, wait, I'm going to be an adult Link now? Like that's crazy.
Like, I thought it was at the end of the game.
I thought, yeah, I'm like, I didn't think that was going to happen. And then you start going through like all these different like dungeons, and there's some of them that are like,
Water
like,
temple.
I mean, that's a point of contention for people.
Point of contention.
A lot of people will put that as a major negative against the game. I personally don't. I think that it is perfectly constructed in order to do what it needs to do. I will say that like the swapping of the iron boots and all that is tedious, and they did fix that in the 3D version, like the 3DS version, where you can like just like have it quick equipped, and like take them on and off, so you can go through all the different levels. But
oh yeah, they like made it like an equipable item.
Yeah, but I think these are all like strengths to the game. Like it makes the game really memorable, and like those final like dungeons, like the Shadow Temple is like scary, dude. It's dark, like I like that. I remember as a kid, like freaked me out a lot. Like walking around and there's like guillotines and there's like blood splatters. I'm like, what am I playing? Like this is for real, right? And it's still great. It's still great. It's still a lot of fun. The boss designs are incredibly memorable. Like
they're simple but they're sweet.
They're effective.
Yeah. Like they're memorable. It's part of my problem with like even like the new Zelda with the bosses in particular.
Yeah.
So I'm not like trying to like slander those games. Like those games do a lot of crazy stuff too, but the bosses in particular, like I feel like Skyward was the last one before Breath, right? I
Yeah.
feel like Skyward was the last one to do bosses, right?
Yeah.
'Cause
I would agree with this.
the last two, like they've just the bosses don't feel the way they used to. Like the first, okay, so Breath, they just feel like fights. They don't feel like little puzzles like they used to.
No.
And then in Tears, where they're like, they kind of make it feel a little more like a puzzle, they're super short. And so it's like, and it's
Yeah.
not that like boss fights in Zelda have ever really been like super long either, but
Well, for me, it
they've
was like
been longer.
the pairing of the boss with like the dungeon was always like most
Like,
exciting.
yeah, it's
like
what is the boss going to look
like that's what would after Ocarina of Time, every single like Zelda that came out, that was what would go through my head. Was
I
I'm like,
feel like,
what's the dungeon going to be like? Like, what kind of places are they going to put me into?
Yeah.
You know, and like what are the bosses there? You know, like as a kid too, like, and I still see it this way, but like the general structure of like of a Zelda game has changed so dramatically. Like, it's kind of insane, and like in good ways, but like there was like almost like the dungeon before the dungeon. Like there's like the puzzles before you got into the dungeon to solve the puzzles. You know, so it was like, you know, if I'm gonna go to, you know, the fire temple, like how do I actually get there, and like how do I get myself equipped to be able to like withstand the heat, and like where do I find the tunic, and there's all these things that you're always doing, and it adds to that whole sense of adventure, which is like what the game's all about. It's like feeling like you're on some grand adventure, you know.
And I think those are those kind of things that I'm like referring to, and I'm like, I feel like Zelda's the only like the only adventure games to like really do it like right, because it's like even like Elden Ring's really good, but for different reasons. And in terms of it being open world, and like if you go to like a snowy area in that game, you're kind of just doing the same thing you've been doing, but now in a snowy area, there's like snowy enemies, right?
Yeah.
And like a Zelda like adventure game, and it's not to like, it's more, I'm saying this more just for example, like you look at like a Zelda game, you go to like a snowy area, and usually like you can't really get that far because maybe you're like freezing and you're cold, or you like there's a lake, and when you touch the lake you like freeze.
Yeah.
And so you need to figure out some way, and there's stuff like that where as you're going on the adventure, to your point of like the puzzles before, like the dungeon and stuff like that, it all just like adds to the adventure. It's like it makes sense. It's like I'm in a snowy area, I'm gonna be cold, I need like stuff to keep warm. If I'm in like a hot area, I need stuff to like, you know, withstand the heat.
Yeah.
And all those little things just like throughout the journey is what like adds to the adventure, because it's not necessarily just those things by themselves.
Yeah, it's like the characters.
It's the characters
like,
you're talking to.
the story's classic.
Yeah,
you know?
it's the little breadcrumb that you're following, and then you run into these puzzles, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, let me think about this, and then, you know, and then you kind of figure your way through it. It all adds to the whole feel of the game. And I think one thing that like I could say with like Ocarina in particular is like that game's very like it's very satisfying.
Yeah.
Like the sound of like just opening the menu and then swapping through it, you're like moving the little cube and you're going through that, and then you're like clicking on your items, you're equipping your stuff. Like it's got a particular like tactile kind of like feel to all the sound effects and stuff like that, and it's just very satisfying. And then when you like go to that one menu where it has all this stuff, like the key items, right? You like see that slowly fill up like as you go through the game. Like it's satisfying.
Yeah.
like the game's just very satisfying.
You learn like new songs, and you're able to like,
Yeah.
you know, transport around
Yeah.
and whatnot. Like that was always an exciting one. Like you feel like that sense of like also even like as you like learn these songs, so you can get around and like do certain things in the world. Like it's very satisfying too, because you're like, oh yeah, and I remember that. Like,
Yeah.
like you're playing it recently, and you're like, well, how'd that song go again?
yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's, you know, down A, up,
Yeah.
down A.
Yeah,
Like,
you just kind of like learn the
like you
codes.
just know it, you know.
Yeah. And to that point, yeah, I was playing it like a week ago on I recommend if anyone hasn't played it, wants to play it, and you have Nintendo Online, just play it on the emulator they have. It actually runs really well.
Yeah.
It actually runs better than emulating on your computer, so it's more stable. You don't have like any artifacting either. There's a ton of problems like that when you're emulating N64 on computer.
Yeah. Or just go buy an N64.
You could do that too.
3DS version's good too.
3DS version's really good. That one emulates fine.
Yeah.
That one emulates really well. But yeah, I recommend you check it there. And like the game really does hold up. Honestly, like it's I think I think the one thing I could say is it's like it's definitely from a different time in terms of how it looks, and it also like games nowadays are they're so focused on like stealing your attention and like getting you like just so laser focused on like parts of the UI, and it's like distracting, but it's like it's sucking your attention into the screen.
Yep.
It's like sensory overload in a lot of ways. Like, just try to get into Call of Duty nowadays, guys. Like, it's
crazy.
ridiculous.
Literally, just try to get into it.
Just try, okay? It's like sensory overload, where it's like there's so many buttons and pop-ups and all this stuff, and so like this is definitely from another time in that regard. Also, like there's none of that stuff. It's very basic. It's very like there's just a menu and a couple buttons on it.
Like, dare I say it, you might not feel like exhausted after you're done playing it. Your session, you might actually feel like kind of refreshed and like you relaxed a bit.
Yeah.
You know, like games nowadays, like I don't really get that.
Oh,
like there's some games.
There's few games here and there.
But generally speaking, I feel like
the games I feel that with
like I worked.
The games I feel that with nowadays are like either old games that I haven't played yet, like Vampire the Masquerade, or like right now I'm trying to like play through Call of Cthulhu. That was a Bethesda game, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. But yeah, it's either like old games that I haven't played yet, or like very few and far in between. There's like a release here or there where it's like it's not. I load it up and I can tell it's not trying to get me super distracted.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of felt like that with Armored Core. Like, that, I don't feel like that game really, like, for what it is, I don't feel like it's, like, really, like, vying to, like, steal your attention.
Yeah.
Like, I was able to play, like, a couple missions.
I genuinely feel like an Elden Ring or any of the From Software games are the closest to, like, yeah, I'm not saying that they're not, like, difficult and all of that, but, like,
no, they're hard.
But when it comes to, like, the way that the reveals occur and the way that you progress through the game, like, I think that's, like, some of the closest stuff I've seen to, like, a Zelda game.
Yeah.
You know, which is a big reason why I like them so much.
It's presented very different, but it is very similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember when Breath of the Wild came out, you know, and we'll end with this, you know, but I remember when that game came out, you know, there's people tweeting at you know, Nintendo and going like, man, this is great. Like, this game actually feels kind of like Dark Souls. You guys took some inspiration, you know, and then the Dark Souls account like responded back and they're like, no, they didn't. We're the ones that took inspiration from them, you know? And so it's one of those things where it's like, if you really want to, like, if you're like us, like I love going to the thing that informed the thing that I like, you know, and like, granted, like I did play this as a kid, you know, so I was there like when it came out, but if you like these kinds of games, if you like adventure, if you want to like have something that's like fun and enjoyable, you can get immersed.
Fresh.
And still fresh, honestly. Like,
if you haven't played it, if somehow you haven't played it nowadays, like that game is very fresh. If you just go into it,
you'll have a blast.
Yeah,
you'll have a blast, and like you'll really enjoy it. And it's not gonna, like, for what it's worth, it's not gonna take like 30, 40, 50 hours to beat. Like, it's you can work through it.
Yeah,
you know. So yeah, that's my personal favorite game of all time. I love it. I think it's the best game. You know, I've had other games come out where they tried to, and like I have enjoyed them a lot, but Ocarina of Time always has me coming back. You know, that's like one of those only games I play like pretty much like once a year, because I can get through it pretty quick. So yeah, Ocarina of Time. Brother. Well, this has been Two Souls on the games. Feels good to talk about Ocarina. I'm not gonna lie, and we're happy that you stuck around.
We're happy you stuck around. I think the only thing I'll say is thank you for watching.
Yeah. Have a good time. And we'll see you next week.